Welcome everybody to another edition of TalkingWithHeroes.com talk show program. I am Bob Calvert, your host. I'm behind the camera this time, and we're still here in Gary Owen in Iraq, and we're with Fort Carson's 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 4th Infantry Division, and we're now with the commander of Forward Support Company, which is FSC, with the 1/8 Infantry Division, and with somebody I've met before. Maybe we'll talk a little bit about it. He's the commander, Captain Alan Fowler. Welcome, Captain.
Thank you
to
for having
Talking
me.
with Heroes. I'm sure Major General Graham will probably want to see this someday since we met through him.
Well, I'll have to do well then. I don't want to be embarrassed.
Oh, I'm sure you'll do great. Why don't you share a little bit about yourself with the people watching this? Maybe a little bit about how long you've served first and where you're from.
Okay. I grew up in the suburbs of Rochester, New York, along Lake Ontario. Joined the Army initially in '96. I enlisted as a mechanic. Just kind of, college wasn't really working out for me the first go around. I wasn't quite a mature, old enough guy to really do it, and no self-discipline. But the Army quickly changed that around, and I decided it was a good place to be. So I got commissioned in 2002. I've been on active duty now for a little over 10 years, the last 8 of which have been as an officer. I came to Fort Carson after most of my time being up at Fort Drum, and then a brief stint as an advisor over here for the Iraqi Army. One of their logistics battalions was from February to February of 08 to 09.
Okay, why don't you talk a little bit about that, and then lead up to coming here. So obviously, you know, our goal with this mission is to bring back just over and over again the progress that's happened here, so people back in America get to see this finally.
Well, for me, the last deployment, I was a 10, 11-man team, and we were attached or embedded with 2 Iraqi battalions simultaneously. One of them was by Iraqi standards, a fairly high-functioning logistics battalion, and the other one, we were just helping them stand up. And so it was an interesting dichotomy to see the difference between the 2 of them. The one that had been up and running for a while, again, it was high-functioning at that time by their standards. And in the time that we were there, it was impressive to me to see how they did advance, and some of the new blood that they were getting in with some of their younger officers moving in from being lieutenants up to captain, and some even up to that major position where they were starting to have some influence and weren't necessarily indoctrinated with the old Iraqi Army, which had a different way of doing things because they had a different viewpoint on the world than the new Iraqi Army does. And as they got better at what they were doing, and it wasn't just the actual actions, I think they performed the actions very well, but the whole idea of planning and looking ahead at things and becoming more of a proactive, able to do that of their own volition as opposed to just reacting to whatever was going on, and helping them and working through with, especially one of my counterparts. It was for me a very rewarding experience working with that unit and seeing the progress in him as an officer, and then that unit as a whole was really great. Helping the other one stand up was a very exasperating kind of feeling most of the time. We were doing that just as we were transitioning from America supplying a lot of their equipment to the Iraqi government supplying it through foreign military sales. And that transition was difficult because it went from everything was force-fed to them by us to they were doing it on their own. And of course, anytime you start doing something on your own for the first time, there's a learning curve, and you learn by doing. And being on the end of that, where there was a lot of learning every day about it, both by the Iraqis that we were working with as well as by ourselves, just trying to understand so we could help them out, it was frustrating at times, but it was also that much better when we finally saw them start to get their own stuff of their own volition, and just that changeover from that high-functioning unit, which was in many ways just set up by us, and they just took it over, to seeing them and set it up themselves was a tremendous step forward for them, and it was good to see. It was good to see. And now coming this time, my role is a lot different. As a logistics company commander here, my main concern is making sure that my soldiers are able to provide the right support to the task force, so that we are able to sustain ourselves, because we can't do any advising, any training, or any assisting if we can't survive ourselves. And so making sure that we have the fuel, the food, the ammunition if needed, which right now we're only using for our own training. We haven't been firing any shots on aggression, which is also a startling change from my previous deployments to be here this long into it and say that I don't know of a single round we've fired at an enemy is pretty impressive. And then the maintenance and getting everything fixed up so the trucks work and the ACs are on, because I'll tell you, that's a really bad day if you're in a truck that has an AC that isn't working, and that it's just a really bad day. We do everything we can to avoid that, but sometimes you're out on the road and it just happens, and all you can think is, I can't wait for this mission to be over so I can get back and get that swapped out. But so my interaction with the Iraqis on this deployment has been significantly less, but what I've seen has still been pretty impressive. I remember just the frustration of getting Iraqi units or soldiers to show up at the right place at the right time. And their kind of mentality was, well, as long as we're close, it's good enough. And now, I mean, whenever I go any place to take supplies or equipment or personnel someplace, we have Iraqis who escort us, because it's part of their country, it's their sovereignty. Then, you know, it's their nation. We're just here to assist, and having that escort. And most often they're on time, early sometimes, ready to go, no issues. And I'll tell you that we would never have this success rate with that 2-3 years ago, working with an Iraqi unit, if there wasn't somebody, standing behind them cracking the whip. And now it's them doing it themselves. And again, it's a small measure, but still impressive from where I sit.
Yeah, it's been very impressive for me to hear all this. My son-in-law was with the 1-8 when they were in Mosul, and really different deployment, totally different. I mean, I remember interviewing Colonel Johnson after they got back, your predecessor, and, off the air, he told me how rough it really was on those soldiers. But they laid the groundwork for the progress that's happening in Mosul now,
Across the country, it's impressive just to see all the signs, and, some of them are, I think some of the most obvious signs are the ones that are hardest to see, because when nothing happens, it's not like you put a mark on the board, but when something does happen, so the fact that you haven't been putting those marks on the board sometimes gets lost until a few days ago I asked one of the soldiers who work in the command post, and they track all the activity that happens and the significant events, most of which means it's some sort of bad thing that's happened. And I asked him to clean up the board and start with a fresh map, because it was getting just kind of hard to read, because we'd written over it so many times, drawing out routes and all. And so we did, and I looked at the map and I asked him, well, how far back does this go? And he was telling me that it went back to November. And I just looked at him like, wow, we're talking about 9-10 months, and last time I was here, this is what it would look like if we were tracking 9 or 10 days.
Right.
And that's, the volumes that is spoken by how quiet it has been is sometimes hard to remember. In part because it still isn't perfectly safe out there. I mean, we still have to pay attention to what we're doing and be ready, because there are bad people out there who still want to do bad things. So we've got to be ready for it. And if they come, we need to be able to defend ourselves and bring our soldiers home safe and in one piece, both mentally and physically. And trying to keep ready for that is a constant battle that we fight. And then because of that, it's sometimes hard to remember that, wow, it really has been quiet. It has been fairly secure. And, the bad day could be out there, and we want to avoid that bad day, but if it's here, we have to be ready.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been on route clearance convoys before, and I guess the first night we were here, we talked to a route clearance convoy, some soldiers, And I asked them how many IDs they've seen since they've been here. 0. And I said, that is great. I mean, but the danger there is they'll get complacent. And so they have to be as alert every time they go out.
And it's really hard sometimes for some of the younger soldiers who haven't been here as much to remember that. You know, I can remember the first couple of missions that we went on outside the installation here. You can see that apprehension in their eyes, especially the guys who haven't done it before. And now I look at them, and because it has been so relatively quiet and relatively safe, they have a different look about them, and it's taking my more experienced guys, my guys who have had the bad day in the past, you know, those of us who have had to, you know, go through the bad day, and making sure that we impress upon them that, you know, we're glad it's been this way, and it's great that it's been this way. Just remember what we've been training for, what we've taught you. Keep alert, because, you know, it's an instant, and it's a completely different world that you're in, and I hope that naivety never gets taken from them. But if it does, again, you just got to be ready for it.
Yep. Well, you're all doing a great job. And I'm excited that we can bring your stories back to the American people. It's long overdue they hear about the tremendous progress that's happened here. And from your standpoint as commander, I always like to ask soldiers about care packages and letters. And see you smiling here. I'll talk about that.
My brother-in-law, he's a teacher near Boston in Massachusetts, and his students have always been great. Every time, this is my 4th deployment, every deployment I've been on, he and his students always just inundate us with care packages and gifts and all. And this last time, getting ready to come over, he said, you know, well, what do you want this time? Is there anything in specific that you and your guys really need? And it's the first time I got here, I sent back to my wife, hey, tell your brother we need quality toilet paper, because the stuff out here is just awful if we can find it. And he had sent me a note telling me how hysterical his students thought it was. He teach 5th grade, I think, that they had to send toilet paper to soldiers. And you know, it's one of those things that the things that you take for granted back home is, you know, it's quality toilet paper makes a difference in one's life, and you don't realize it until you go day in and day out with stuff that is just not the same. And it's amazing, those little things like that. You know, using plasticware instead of real flatware in the DFAC or in the dining facility every meal. You know, it's not as bad as it used to be. I remember my first deployment, it was the cheapest plastic flatware you could ever imagine, and it broke every dang time you tried to use it. And just going home and going, this is a piece of flatware that is made of metal that I know is not going to fall apart in my meal. And, you know, little things like that make a difference. And so, you getting the care packages and, you know, the little nice things to have from home is always great. And especially when it's from church groups or schools, and you got kids writing letters, it's amazing the things that they write, and some of them are absolutely hysterical. And just, yeah, you have to just sit down and read some of them to really understand. But it's how honest kids are, and sometimes their honesty isn't always the politically correct thing or even the nice thing.
I'm going to have to close this segment so we can get this on YouTube, okay? And we'll come back in about 30 seconds.
No problem.
Okay? Once again, folks, we're here in Gary Owen in Iraq with Fort Carson's 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 4th Infantry Division. We'll be right back with Part 2 with Captain Alan Feller.